Dandelions. First thing I like to do with them is just pick the flowers off, take off as much of the green stuff around them as you can, and then cook them with eggs in an omelette. Though dandelions have been used in other ways. The roots make a substitute for coffee, and the leaves in the spring are delicious to eat. Besides dandelion coffee, another thing good to drink is Navajo tea. Sometimes it's called Indian tea, and a lot of people know it by the Spanish name cota. When you pick Navajo tea, remember this is a perennial plant with very delicate roots, so don't pull it up by the roots. Instead, pick one long stalk off of each plant, leaving the rest to grow, and then dry them. Most people fold them up into quarters or eighths, so they're in small bunches. Dry them before you then brew tea of them. The reason you fold them up is so they'll fit in your teapot. Lamb's quarters, a kind of wild spinach. They taste naturally a little salty, and you can eat the leaves raw or cooked, just as you would spinach. Some people freeze them to use again later on after they're not in season. Many people know them by the Spanish name quelites. And the best way to cook those, besides just cooking them as you would spinach, is to add them to cooked seasoned beans. Quelites and beans is a famous Spanish-American recipe, and they are delicious that way. If you have a pot of already cooked pinto beans with some onion and seasonings in them, just add your lamb's quarters to that and let them cook long enough to get limp, about 3 to 5 minutes. One of the tastiest things are stinging nettles. They grow in sort of wet places, usually where there's rotted wood in the soil. And they do sting. The leaves sting. You have to pick them very carefully. But as soon as you start to cook them, the minute they hit boiling water, the sting goes away, and they are delicious and have a buttery taste, like buttery spinach. Here are some all ready to eat. Like spinach, they cook down, so pick a lot more of them than you think you're going to need. Most of us know Indian paintbrush, but did you know that they make a good snack? The little green flowers in the center of those orangey red bracts. If you pull them out and suck on them, they have sweet nectar in them. And another thing fun for a snack are the seeds of these things called creeping mallow. They have tiny little round green seeds on them. They're related to hollyhocks, so the seeds will look like hollyhock seeds, only much smaller. They're very good in a salad. Something else that you may find are husk tomatoes. These are the wild version of what we call tomatillos if we buy them in the store. And they come up almost anywhere. You never know where you're going to find them. But if you take the little husk off the tiny little tomato inside, here's a whole basket full of them, they have a different sort of tomatoey taste, like tomatillos. You can eat them raw or cooked. Most people put them in salsa. You've probably seen these things that look like oversized dandelions, dandelion puffs. They are called salsify, and they have edible roots, which are called oyster roots, because somebody thought they tasted like oysters. The roots are good to eat, but myself, I think they sort of taste like wood. Here's the flower of the salsify. If you see these like giant dandelions, if you can pull up the plant and get the root, it's good to eat. I think you have to cook them. I've tried them raw, and they're tough and stringy. Here are the roots. Not very big, but good to eat. There are a number of things which have edible roots and bulbs. And one of them are the wild onions. Do you see the little root there? They're just like cultivated onions. If you find them growing, you can pull them up, peel them, and you have a little tasty onion there. When they're tall and in bloom, they make really pretty flowers. Wild carrot. It's easiest to recognize when it has seeds like this, but they're still not easy to find. If they're around, get someone to show you where they are. The edible root is way deep. You have to follow a little skinny root down for about a foot or two before you find a fat carrot-like root at the bottom. Indian rice grass, a wonderful grass which grows in clumps, and those tiny seeds on the top of them are the edible part. They were gathered and collected to eat even before corn was grown in this area. You can shake the little seeds off of them, and they are now usually mixed with cornmeal or flour to make tasty and nutritious tortillas. Most of us know that prickly pear fruits are very good to eat. Of course, they're covered with little thorns, so the way to fix them is to put the fruit on a fork or a stick and hold it over a flame until you've burned off the thorns and the skin of it has kind of curled up so it can be peeled off. Then you can eat the fruit. And yucca plants have edible fruits, especially these broad-leafed ones that they call banana yuccas because of the size and shape of the big green fruits. This is the stage at which it's good to eat. Pick it, and you can cook it, and they're kind of like a squash. Of course, if you pick all the fruits, your yucca won't have any seeds to make more yuccas. Wild strawberries. If you find them anywhere, they're delicious to pick and eat. Remember, bears like them too, so always look around to make sure you aren't harvesting with a bear nearby you. But they are delicious. The plants have white flowers that are very pretty, like these. The ones growing in the shade don't usually have strawberries on them. You have to find them in the sun to be able to pick and eat the little strawberries from them. Another delicious wild berry is the wild raspberry, like what this little girl is picking. They look just like any raspberries that you may be used to seeing in a store, and they are delicious. Notice the leaves of the raspberries. They're distinctive. They look just like the leaves on cultivated raspberries. Choke cherries are a famous wild fruit from trees. The tree has flowers in little clusters like this one with a butterfly on it. And later on, these become choke cherries. I think the reason they're called choke cherries is that when you pick them fresh and raw, they are sweet but also very bitter. You can't eat them raw. They're always eaten either cooked or dried, and they have seeds. And here are some. They aren't quite ripe. They'll get blacker than that. But if you cook or dry them, they taste really good. Most people make syrup or jelly from them. Native Americans used to gather them dried and just grind them up, seeds and all, to add to the kind of sausage which is called pemmican. If you do decide to use the seeds, be sure they're mixed in something with lots of protein, because the seeds themselves, if eaten without protein, can be poisonous. These are wild currants. They look just like cultivated currants, and anytime you find them, they're perfectly good to pick and eat. Closely related to the currants is another edible plant, wild gooseberries. Gooseberries always grow where there is rotted wood in the soil, so look for them in the woods. Currants can grow almost anywhere and are usually out in the sun. Currants turn bright red like this, or some of them are bright yellow, called golden currants. They're still good to eat. Gooseberries, when they're ripe, are green with a few little pink patches on them. A much taller bush that often grows to be 12 or 15 feet high is the three-leaf sumac. Sometimes it's called lemonade bush because the tiny fuzzy red berries taste like lemon. And if you put them in water and crush them, they give it a lemonade-y flavor. It only takes a few berries to do that. But if you gather the berries and dry them, another thing that makes a good drink is the fruits of wild roses. We call the fruits of wild roses rose hips, and they're just full of seeds, but they taste like dried apple. Because they're so full of seeds, most people make a tea of them, simmering them in hot water so that you can drink the nice hot apple cider flavor of them and get the benefit of the vitamin C. They're full of vitamin C. But if you eat them, you can eat the dried fruits if you want to, and you'll have to decide whether to swallow the seeds or spit them out. But they're very good made into a tea to drink. Juniper trees are useful in more than one way. The leaves, when they're burned, make the juniper ash, which is added to things like blue cornmeal. If you cook blue corn without adding juniper ash, it comes out a funny, pale, purpley color. It doesn't stay blue like blue corn. And the juniper ash also adds calcium to it. So most things made with blue corn have juniper ash made by just burning the branches of juniper and catching the ashes as they fall. Most blue corn things have juniper ash added to them. But the berries are also edible. Some of them are quite sweet and really tasty. Some of them are bitter and taste like turpentine, and although they're probably edible, they aren't nearly as good. I have found that if you watch the juniper trees, the birds always know which are the tastiest berries. And so if you see which ones birds are eating, those are the sweet ones that you want to pick to eat. By the end of the winter, the birds have usually eaten all the sweet ones, and the only berries that are left are not very tasty, and so they probably aren't worth picking to eat. Let's finish up with our state tree, the pinyon tree. Most of us recognize these trees with their short needles in pairs of twos, and pinyon nuts are probably one of the most nutritious wild foods you can get anywhere. As you know, the nuts are formed in small cones, and then they fall when the pinyon trees are ripe. Most trees produce a good crop of nuts only about once every 2 or 3 years. But then, when you gather them, they are one of the most nutritious wild foods anywhere. And for centuries, they were an important source of protein for people here in the Southwest because pinyon nuts are so nutritious that they were an important protein source for everybody. There are other kinds of trees that produce nuts related to pinyon nuts. There's another species in Nevada, And there are even trees in Italy and in China that produce edible pine nuts, but they aren't as good as pinyons. If you buy ones that are cheap, they're probably from the trees in China where they grow them. And they're okay to use in cooking, but they aren't quite as good as pinyon nuts.